starting with Zack Butters. Let's have a look at this article here that came out, posted by Sam McClure late last night. So Sam McClure says, Port Adelaide vice-captain Zack Butters is emerging as a key domino in the upcoming trade period, with several Victorian clubs recently becoming aware of his potential availability despite being contracted until the end of next year. So his potential availability, becoming aware of that. So reading into that line there, without going into the depths of this article just yet, it seems like with the way the club is trending at the moment, maybe the transition with the coach, has been a lot of media spin around that. And then you throw in the fact that they're not really performing as well as they had been, at least early on this year, relative to the preliminary finalist side that they were last year. That might be a little bit concerning. And when you're on the sidelines nursing an injury, that's when you have all the opportunity to consider where you are, where you belong, and where the club's at, and whether that aligns with your goals, and whether you guys are sharing the same timeline. So there's a lot to play out there. Having grown up in Bacchus Marsh and playing for the Western Jets in the Coates Talent League at under 18 level, there is certainly a play there and a lure and an alluring idea to come back home and play for one of the big Victorian clubs. He's only 24 years old. I'm pretty sure he's a co-captain, or he's in the leadership team for Port Adelaide. So he does hold some really good characteristics within his game and as a player. And for a club like Collingwood, we want to bring those types of people in, and he is a serious harden up. But we'll keep diving into this article as we get further along with it. So, knowledgeable sources at Port Adelaide, who are not able to speak publicly about the matter, said the club was confident of retaining him. I feel like I heard that about Zack Butters in the off-season last year, but anyways, we move. While Port is adamant it has ample salary cap space to afford to offer him a significantly increased pay packet, Butters, a two-time All-Australian, is open to exploring a trade at the end of this season, 12 months before he will become a restricted free agent. So let me paint this picture for you when it comes to understanding his contract. He's served the club he's in his 8th year of service. Next year, he will be a restricted free agent. So hypothetically, if he doesn't get traded during this season, you go into a situation where you offer him a contract as a club at the end of next year. Port Adelaide have an opportunity to match it. If they match the contract, then a trade would be forced. However, if they weren't to match the offer, they would just take compensation. But you wouldn't do that in a situation for a player like Zack Butters, who really, you're not getting him at this point of his career for anything less than 2 first-round draft picks. You know, you've seen players like Dan Houston and Bailey Smith go for less. I think this is the type of player who's probably a caliber above both. And you'd be very stiff if you're Port Adelaide, especially after what you lost in Dan Houston. I mean, you've already got Jack Lukosius on the sidelines. You've taken a salary hit by accepting Gold Coast offloading Rory Atkins. They got Joe Richards, who, yes, is a good player and he's nifty, but small forwards like Joe Richards, I say this as respectably as possible, they are a dime a dozen. So they certainly would feel that they were underdone or they were underwhelmed with the outcome of the trade, but it is what it is. They get a first round pick along with that as well. So who knows what they do with that? I think that's the 2025 first round pick that they have up their sleeve. So I'm not sure if they have 2 first round draft picks available in this upcoming trade period. The draft period as well. So we'll see what happens there. But that's what happens if he gets to the back end or the final year of his contract. However, if he remains or if he chooses to exercise a potential move back to Victoria at the end of this year, there's one way or no other way. It's this way or the highway, should I say. Collingwood can come forth with a trade option and present that to Port Adelaide. But if Port Adelaide say no, then Zack Butters has no other choice but to remain at the club. Now, you can say Dan Houston had 3 or 4 years on his contract. Is there any exception to that sort of situation? I mean, could have Port kept Dan Houston? Yes, they could have said, Dan, fair enough, you want to leave, but you're under contract, mate, and you have to stay. Perhaps the player agency that was representing Dan Houston amongst this all had used leverage to manipulate this scenario that transpired between the two clubs. Perhaps they said, look, if you don't give up Dan Houston, then it's going to hurt you in future negotiations. Maybe the Dan Houston management group already support players that play at Port right now, or there's players that Port are looking to adding to their squad in the future. Then maybe they've used that as an upper ground. But I feel like with Zack Butters, that's not going to be an acceptable situation, an outcome for Port Adelaide. It's either a really auspicious trade comes about at the end of this year, and it has to be so good that they can't say no, or Zack Butters will have to honour that final year next year, and then he can consider moving them. But it sounds like he's going to leave at some point, whether it's this year or the next. Would it be Collingwood? Would it be another club? I'm not too sure. Collingwood are a part of the conversation. We can dive into what we can offer him to get him down, but we'll get there in a moment. Port Adelaide would like to extend Butters' contract beyond 2026 now, but neither the player nor his management group have indicated they would be open to that conversation yet. And that should be a grave concern for Port Adelaide, in my opinion. I mean, Butters doesn't have to do anything more this year to prove what he's worth. I'm sure Butters, and as the previous paragraph suggested, Port have ample salary cap space to give him a big pay packet. But if he's not willing to engage now, then what does that say? It only points towards further consideration for his management group and himself to look at other and explore other club opportunities. That's what it seems like to me. He's managed by Capital Sports, and he's recently changed managers within the company from Mark Kleiman to Peter Lenton. So I'm not sure if there's anything to read into there. Maybe you guys know a little bit more about both of those player agents. I'm not sure what the move entails there. Butters, a loved and respected teammate and person at Port Adelaide, has an extremely close relationship with outgoing coach Ken Hinkley, who will officially hand over the reins to Josh Carr at the end of the season. So that's another key pillar that is going to stumble as we get closer to the back end of the year. Who knows? Maybe Ken Hinkley, yes, while he's stepping down, does he go to a club as an assistant coach or plays or coaches in one of the positional departments, midfield, defense, forward? Who knows what he becomes? Does he want to go into recruitment and then find himself at a club where he can attract someone like Zack Butters? Maybe that's something that gets old mate Zack over the line to another club. So that's another thing that's working against Port Adelaide right now. Insiders at Port Adelaide said Butters had other strong relationships at the club, but conceded that he and Ken Hinkley had a special bond, and the rival clubs may attempt to use the coach's pending departure as leverage to lure him back to Victoria, which is exactly what we just spoke about. Butters is yet to play this year after having surgery for a minor knee injury in February, but the Power are hopeful he'll return this week against St Kilda. He watched from the stands as his Port Adelaide teammates suffered a shock loss to Essendon last Thursday night at Marvel Stadium, and boy, didn't they look horrendous. I mean, Essendon didn't look amazing, and they were still beaten by them. They need Zack Butters. He's the heart and soul of the club. Like, while he has immense polish about his game, he's also just hard at it, and one of those players you just cannot replace. Similar to Braden Maynard, obviously a caliber above, though. He completed a strong running session in Melbourne on Friday morning with Port Adelaide staff and stayed in Victoria to see family before flying back to Adelaide on Sunday. Port believe that at the very least, Butters will remain at the club until the end of 2026. We'll see what the end of this year has to say about that. I imagine it, and this is a quote by Chris Davies, who is the football boss at Port Adelaide. He said, I imagine at this point he's going to be a restricted free agent, so we've got control of that situation anyway. So he's just suggesting that they have the upper hand when it comes to any negotiations over the next 2 years. But there's no doubt that Zack is going to get paid. So he's just insinuating or implying that there's an opportunity to get a really big bag from Port Adelaide for Zack. If there are clubs still providing inflationary pressures to others, that gets well known pretty quick. For the teams for the teams desperate to land players, sometimes if they don't, it's not overly helpful because it does create some inflationary pressure across the competition we've all got to deal with. So this is Chris Davies alluding to, you look at St Kilda, who are offering TDK and Finn Callahan really big contracts, and then with the unlikelihood of these types of players joining these clubs who aren't destination clubs, it inflates that specific market for those players if they were to go elsewhere. So it is it's a tricky situation to navigate around when it comes to the business side of things. Hawthorn, who have Carlton's first round pick in the upcoming draft, have made it no secret they want to add to their midfield depth. The Hawks also have a war chest of money, given how even their playing list is and how many players are performing above their contract. Richmond and Essendon both have 2 first-round picks this year. The Tigers have their own and North Melbourne's, while the Bombers have their own and Melbourne's first-round pick. It's conceivable they could both end up with 2 top 10 picks. Richmond's number 1 pick from last year's draft, emerging star Sam Lawler, also hails from Bacchus Marsh. Interesting. Davies adds to his radar interview saying, we've got no restrictions around keeping the players that we're wanting to keep. Our salary cap has been well managed over the time. We certainly have the money if we want to keep the players who are out of contract. So you got players like Farrell as well, Miles Bergman, who is looking really good this year. I hear there's whispers that he may get to St Kilda. I think he's got a couple close mates there, so that will be interesting to see how that pans out. Zack Butters will certainly be a player that we'll want to keep when the time comes. With where the dollars are going in AFL, all of those guys are going to get paid, and fair play to them because they've all performed well. And the final line in this article is Sam McClure adding that Capital Sports have declined to comment. So read that how you see that. That's another interesting no comment from a player agency that is representing Zack Butters at this time. So, yeah, a bunch of information there to dive into. As far as what Collingwood can offer, bearing in mind we have Thomas McGuan, which we will need draft capital. It would be extremely, extremely unlikely to acquire the likes of Tom McGuan and Zack Butters in the same period, in the same year. However, next year would be a different conversation with the ability to utilize 2 future first round picks 2 years in advance, plus the current year that gives you a bit more flexibility in being able to get these big players to your club. We bear in mind we may lose a Braden Maynard, and we would probably be compensated for a first-round draft pick there. So it sort of brings us back into that conversation of potentially getting someone like Zack Butters over to the club. But with Hawthorn having 2 first-round draft picks available and how well they're doing, they're obviously the destination club. They've just recently had chats with Oscar Allen. I think Sam Mitchell flew over to Perth over the last coming days, and one of the things he needed to do there was have a meeting with Oscar Allen. So that's a very interesting one there, isn't it?